But hey, this is all good. This is fantastic. This is what you want to see. It's basically all original, unmolested. It's not hacked up. It's not torn apart. Parts haven't been scavenged. So full steam ahead. Hey guys, welcome back to the Zenith porthole party. I've been working on the blonde I picked up at an estate sale. Well, I also got these sets at that same estate. And this is another porthole. 16-inch metal cone. At the time I got it and did a video on it, I thought it had a 16 EP4, which many of them do, and those are really, really hard to replace because I believe only Zenith uses them. But this one has a GP4. I didn't realize that when I tested it. Now it tests okay, but GP4 is much better because RCA and others use them, and they are a lot easier to get. What's the difference? The flexion angle. 170, 190, I believe. The GP4 is the shorter one, so they are not interchangeable, not without some mechanical manipulation. All right, so what are we going to do here? I'm going to pull the chassis. We took a preliminary look when I first got it, but that's all I know. I have not looked underneath. So, we're going to take the back off. Hey, I never noticed that before. They got little rubber bumpers on it. What a nice touch. So when you put it up against the wall, you won't smash the set into it. I imagine the power cord will suffer a bit. It's got to go anyways. It's way too crunchy and crusty. Alright, so we're going to take the back off. And note it has a separate chassis for the power supply down below, just like the blonde does, which is nice because it makes it easier to work on. You got some of the weight off the main chassis, and down here, divide and conquer is always nice. Alright, so I got to remove the screws, and I imagine the chassis bolts are there, and pull the knobs off the front. And always be careful. Most, if not all, Zenith porthole sets have a switch up front for the expand versus normal view. And sometimes it's screwed to the cabinet. And if you yank the chassis out, you're going to rip that and rip the wires right out of that switch and destroy it. So, got to be careful of that. Now, we got lucky with this set. And not only does it have the original metal back, all the screws were present. It's usually not the case. And these are not your common, typical screws. If anybody knows of a source for these, I would be grateful if you could share it. I don't mean something that's close. I mean something that's just like this, where I don't quite know what they're called, but it's like there's a washer built into the screw, but it's all one piece of metal. And I think they're brass that's been chemically treated to darken them. Could be bronze, I don't know. But it'd be nice to find that for the situations when all the screws are not there. Alright, so here's what we got. So that red color means it's a rebuilt replacement CRT, which is not a bad thing at all, because the original may very well have been worn out. So we got to remove this plug that goes down to the power supply. And this might be for... oh no, this is the built-in antenna. It goes up here. I'm not sure what this is for, but it's snaking around to the front. It's a ground wire. Might be there to bleed off static charge that might build up because of the metal cone pitcher tube. Hopefully I don't have to take that block off. There's one on the other side. It should just slide out once I take the bolts out. And yeah, it feels like at least some of the bolts are present. I gotta get out a wrench and take them out. And this guy will be attached to the bottom. Well, that's going to be a pain because the bolts come up from the bottom, and they got a solid piece of wood here, so I can't get a tool in. Well, I suppose with the top chassis pulled out, the cabinet will be a lot lighter, and I can tip it forward if I need to get at that. That I wasn't expecting. Pardon me for being a bit out of breath, but that was actually easier than I thought it would be. They must have learned their lesson over the years, and that switch is not attached to the cabinet. It's all attached to the chassis, which is slid right out. Just got to disconnect this, which, yeah, is a ground wire. That's a cast aluminum bezel. Just goes right to that. And the antenna. 4 bolts. Remove the knobs. Comes right out. It's actually fairly light between the metal cone picture tube and transformer being off-boarded. Not bad. Now we can see when it was made. June 9th, 1950, which is pretty late. I think they made these into 51, but everybody else was switching to rectangular CRTs in 1950, and by 51, I think Zenith might have been the only player left still using round CRTs. Alright, now for power supply chassis. And yeah, I'll tip this thing on its side to get that out. Oh yeah, much easier with the set on its side. There's the 3 bolts power supply. Nice big original speaker. Just disconnected the speaker. It plugs into the power supply / audio amp. So we're good to go. Just remove these 3 bolts. Take that inside and we can take a look underneath. Alrighty, let's see what we have to deal with here. At first blush, it looks similar to the other chassis I just worked on, but a few things jump out at me right away. One of the tuner's on the opposite side, and the high voltage, they flip-flopped them. And also this is rotated 90 degrees. On the other chassis, well, the tubes are pointing straight up. It's this way. I guess to make room for the bigger CRT, they flipped it, meaning we have a much longer dial string for the fine-tuning mechanism. Looks frayed, but dial cord isn't broken. You got all these gears and mechanisms. I imagine this channel clunker is quite hard to turn, as it seems to be in all of these sets. Here's the little compact IF section. I put this tube at a 45-degree angle again, I think to keep it away from the picture tube. Alright, let's tip it on its side. You can't tip it on its side on this side because they've got this bump out from the tuner, so the only way you can possibly go is this way. And I think, yeah, it's pretty flat there. Just want to make sure I don't put any pressure on the CRT. And there's very little good to hold on to on this chassis. Unless you get your fingers right on one of these angle brackets where the bolts go, this just cuts right into your hands. And it seems to be lighter gauge metal because it's got some flex to it, or maybe just because it's a bigger chassis, or I don't know, but it's not, doesn't feel as stable as other ones I've worked on. Weight is distributed kind of awkwardly too. I'm having trouble figuring out what can I safely grab onto to move this thing around. Alright, that does put a bit of pressure on the CRT. I'm not crazy about that. So I'm just going to hold it up here a little bit. I think it'd be okay if I took this plastic cowl off, actually. Well, yeah, I guess it's okay. But I wouldn't want to do that long term. So they put this thick plastic bezel around the outside of the CRT to prevent any charge on this red metal from getting through to the end user. But that also means that it adds a bit to the diameter, so there's a little bit of pressure on it down at the bottom. But I think we're okay. So, what do we got underneath? Well, there's some odd... Wow, that's just from static buildup, I guess. There's a lot of fuzz on the bottom of that CRT. Imagine that whole metal cone is its full high voltage potential, 14,000 volts, attracts a lot of dust to it. Alright, electronics wise, yeah, I'd say it's all original. All original. We got our old friends, the sand-coated resistors, which are all going to be open. Or at least I wouldn't trust them. Let's get a little bit closer. Got our old friends, the bumblebees. And I think it's only bumblebees. We don't have any of those gray caps. Looks odd. Surely that's not original. No, that's a replacement. So somebody strapped in an electrolytic cap. Looks like it was 3 sections originally. They're only using 1 section. They clipped out the other 2 lugs, wrapped a piece of wire, twisted it to hold it in place, grounded it with a hunk of, looks like, line cord to the chassis, and the other end is going off that way somewhere. Okay, we have at least 1 new part. I expect it's there to replace a section of a multi-section electrolytic somewhere else that failed. Are there even any on this? Yeah, there's a couple right here. Who knows, they might have put this in parallel with an existing cap, and obviously there's one in the middle of the chassis, right there. Otherwise, I think it's all original. Can dome on the chassis. And yeah, so that might be a replacement too. Down there. It looks like it's a cap, but it's not a bumblebee. It's like brown plastic. Soldering job looks original though. I'm not sure what that. It could be a resistor too, although I'm pretty sure it's a cap. Pretty sure it looks different than the others. But if that's a replacement, they did such a neat soldering job. I can't tell that it's a replacement. Otherwise, it looks a little different from the other chassis. Like, I'm not sure what that is. Oh, they changed this up, so is that width? That's horizontal hold, okay. On other sets, I believe the horizontal hold is a variable resistor. On this, it's a variable inductor, so the shaft goes right into a slug on this coil, and there's no width control up front with a little slider. Overall, it looks like it's a refined, simplified design from the earlier chassis. Not much though. It's still complicated. It's still an awful lot of caps, a lot of tubes, and just a bit different. The IF is what's under this. And part of it's up here. Part of it, that's probably the sound, and that's probably the video. Gave it maybe more shielding because of the higher frequencies. I think there's a diode in here too. There's an odd looking yellow thing with a band on the end of it underneath here. Take a look at that later when I take this cover off. And yeah, the coating is falling off of these resistors. Got to replace those. You know, 3 of them, 4, at least 4, plus the can dome. But hey, this is all good. This is fantastic. This is what you want to see. It's basically all original, unmolested. It's not hacked up. It's not torn apart. Parts haven't been scavenged. So, full steam ahead. Something else I want to put out underneath the chassis is these guys. You start seeing these used more and more and more in Zenith chassis moving into the 50s. They are ceramic disc capacitors, but crummy ones. What do I mean by that? I mean the dielectric they used causes the capacitance to vary a lot with temperature and with applied voltage. They are not used in critical circuits like timing circuits or resonant filter circuits. They're used for RF bypass, so nothing mission critical. The stamps on them is a proprietary Zenith system. You really got to look at the schematic or find a decoder to figure out what these mean, if you can even read them. Right, this is 22.3, 22.4, another 22.3. That's not the value. It's not like 22 and then 3 zeros. It's not a .022. At least I'm pretty sure it's not. I got to double check, but that's something to be aware of. They're probably okay. Don't change them unless you have to, but that's what those are, as opposed to the more traditional, the bumblebees, the mica caps that we're so used to seeing all the time. Here's a look at the other side of the chassis. We got our high voltage stuff inside this. Unlike in other chassis where the flyback is underneath or on top but just partially covered, this is fully enclosed inside a box. And what went here were these two guys. Two horizontal output tubes wired in parallel. These are the same thing, just different glass envelopes. The internal structure is the same. This was probably a little bit newer. They wanted to save some cost, so they reduced the size of the glass envelope. But these are 6 BQ6s, just straight up in parallel. Not sure why. There's a little discussion about this on video camera recently. Somebody working on a Magnavox with a 16-inch CRT, a 16 AP4, I think. And that also had horizontal output tubes wired in parallel, but those were 6 BG6s. I would think that one of these would be capable of handling it. This thing doesn't run on that much voltage, 12,000 probably, versus smaller sets that are 9 or 10. I would think one of these tubes would be sufficient to drive the flyback, but hey, whatever. Who am I to judge? I think we got some 6SN7s, and I'm pretty sure this is the Wonder Zenith tube, the 6BN6. Yes, sure is. This was a huge savings in terms of parts counts for sound, for FM sound circuits. It's like it is a combination. IF, limiter, detector. This replaces 3 tubes basically, and greatly simplifies the alignment process. If you ever see a buzz control in a set, it's probably got one of these. I wonder if in early revisions, before they used that tube, they used these 2 empty holes here for a couple more tubes for the more complicated version of doing sound. Anyways, there we go. Let's remove this now and take a quick peek at the power supply. Okay, power supply. Just happen to have the one from the 12-inch set, older set up here, still on the chassis. And here is this guy. Pretty darn similar, but there are some significant differences. Transformer's a bit different. I wouldn't say it's any lighter, but this one was designed to reduce magnetic interference. That's why it's shaped a bit different and has a more elaborate enclosure. Maybe they decided it wasn't that essential. Not sure. This has dual 5U4s. This is a 5U4 and a 5Y3. This has 2 metal shields. This just has 1. I don't know if it has the holes for this. Chassis look to be identical, so imagine this one could have a shield on it. It's a heat shield to keep the heat from the tube from hitting the transformer. Now this transformer being it's sort of fatter, but it's not as wide, so it's a little further away from the tube, so maybe they decided that wasn't needed. But the big difference is in this part of it. So here we have 3 electrolytics. Here we have 1, and then this guy. This is our audio output tube. Probably a 6AQ5. No, a 6BF5. I wonder if that's original. No name on it. I'll have to verify against this schematic. Let's take a look underneath. Yeah, not much going on. Can dome, power resistor, another power resistor, a cap, and a couple resistors to bias that audio output tube. Probably all original. As usual. Power resistors are crummy looking. I don't think anything's gone up in smoke. And then that is probably the audio output transformer. You can compare it to this guy. So, yeah, and this guy we just have that. There's filter choke on this guy. And a couple power resistors, and that's all you get in this flavor of it. Alrighty, fantastic. So, how am I going to proceed? Well, I figure I'll do the power supply first, since there's not that much to it. Yeah, one Zenith tube in here, could be the original. So we got an electrolytic. We will replace the power resistors, and basically I'll just replace all the discrete components underneath. There aren't that many. And then we can move on to the main chassis. So I'll replace the parts that are obviously bad, open power resistors, and then we'll try power up.